to Tradition and Insanity. The pro-life case for gun rights as civil protection. The Minnesota tranny shooting is a wake-up call to oppose gun restrictions. By guest contributor John McGlenn. Read by Peter Kwasniewski. On Wednesday, August 27th, two children, aged 8 and 10, sat quietly in their pews during morning mass when Robin Westman opened fire through the church windows. Both were killed. This was not random violence, but calculated evil directed at the most vulnerable among us. The attack raises a profound question that faithful Catholics must confront honestly. Does gun ownership align with Christian values? The answer, grounded in centuries of Catholic moral theology, is unequivocally yes. Along with the two who were killed, 17 others were wounded in the attack, including 14 children and 3 elderly parishioners. All were defenseless before an armed predator who chose his victims with cold calculation. While secular voices reflexively call for disarmament, Catholics must confront a deeper truth about the duty to protect innocent life. St. Thomas Aquinas recognized this truth centuries ago. The defense of innocent life against unjust aggression is not an optional act, but a moral imperative. To stand by while the vulnerable are attacked is, in many ways, complicity. The Catechism speaks to this point with clarity, teaching that love of self is a fundamental principle of morality. Human beings are not only permitted, but in certain circumstances required to preserve and defend their own lives. When this principle is extended outward, its force only grows. The duty to protect others, especially children, is even more binding than the duty to protect oneself. Children can't defend themselves. Their lives and futures depend entirely on the courage of those willing to shield them from harm. To deny such responsibility is to deny both natural law and divine command. It is to treat innocence as expendable, which no Christian conscience can accept. Evil operates within seconds, while help arrives in minutes. These children had no protection except walls and windows that proved useless against determined malice. Had trained, armed parishioners been present, those young lives might have been preserved when the evil was quickly removed. This isn't theory, but documented reality. Time and again, civilian defenders have stopped mass shootings before police could arrive. These cases prove that immediate on-the-spot action saves lives. The Second Amendment doesn't stand in opposition to Catholic values. It safeguards them. In a culture increasingly hostile to Christianity, where churches are targeted and children aren't safe even in worship, responsible gun ownership becomes an expression of love for neighbor. It is not a contradiction of faith, but a practical form of charity. We cannot pray evil away while refusing the tools to confront it. Catholic social teaching reinforces this truth through the principle of subsidiarity. Problems must be addressed at the most immediate level possible by those closest to the need. It is the same principle that entrusts parents, not bureaucrats, with raising their children, or local parishes, not distant offices, with caring for the poor. Applied to security, subsidiarity demands that when danger threatens a family or a parish, the first responsibility lies with those present. Protection cannot be outsourced to far-off authorities who arrive only after the harm is done. The Church's teaching on legitimate defense runs far deeper than modern pacifist interpretations admit. Pope Pius XII stated plainly that self-defense, especially when others' lives depend on it, can rise to the level of grave duty. This principle was never imported from secular culture. It arose from theological reflection rooted in Scripture and natural law. The duty to protect the innocent flows from the imago Dei, the conviction that every human life bears God's image and therefore demands protection. Scripture affirms this truth across salvation history. When Nehemiah rebuilt Jerusalem's walls, he placed swords in the hands of workers, ensuring that the restoration of God's people couldn't be undone by violence. David's confrontation with Goliath was born not of bloodlust, but of fidelity. He struck down a blasphemous enemy to preserve Israel's survival. The Psalms themselves are filled with pleas for God's protection against violent oppressors, proof that divine mercy and human defense are not opposites, but allies. Christ himself emphasized this point, stating that the man who does not own a sword should sell his cloak and buy one. This wasn't abstract metaphor, but practical counsel for those who would soon face persecution. Jesus knew that following him required both spiritual readiness and earthly vigilance. To preserve faith, his followers would at time need to preserve life itself, even if many were given the extraordinary grace to die as martyrs for the faith. The early church fathers acknowledged this same truth. Absolute pacifism was never the Christian inheritance. Augustine developed the just war tradition not as a concession to violence, but as a sober recognition that unchecked evil must be restrained by legitimate authority. Ambrose's refusal to grant communion to Emperor Theodosius after the massacre at Thessalonica demonstrated that spiritual leadership sometimes demands confronting political power with forceful calls to justice. I include these examples as theological insights into the Christian obligation to oppose evil when innocent lives are at stake. As Christianity matured, so did the connection between faith and defense. Medieval knights took vows that bound their swords to the protection of pilgrims, widows, and orphans. Monasteries kept armories, not for conquest, but because evil often required resistance. Catholic teaching has always made a clear distinction between unjust aggression and rightful defense. The principle of double effect makes this clear. An act aimed at stopping violence is not the same as an act aimed at killing, even if death results. The intention must be protection of the innocent, never destruction for its own sake. This moral framework carries directly into the present. The Catholic gun owner who trains carefully for accuracy doesn't pursue death, but prepares to stop danger effectively. His goal is the preservation of life, his family, his community, his parish. Far from undermining responsible gun ownership, Catholic teaching, properly understood, strengthens it. It anchors the right to defend in the responsibility to protect, transforming a mere legal freedom into a moral duty. The virtue of fortitude, one of the 4 cardinal virtues, embodies this truth. It demands the courage to stand up for what is right, even against overwhelming odds. Fortitude is not reckless violence, but disciplined strength, used solely in the pursuit of justice. The Catholic who takes up arms to defend his loved ones demonstrates valor, not vigilantism. And it's this readiness to act that helps explain why America remains generally safer than Europe. American citizens still have the means to protect themselves. In London, grooming gangs operate with terrifying impunity. Predators roam the streets fully aware that ordinary citizens are unarmed and unable to resist. Paris and Berlin experience frequent knife and terror attacks that overwhelm their already stretched police forces. This leaves entire populations reliant on government protection that often arrives too late or not at all. Daily reports from across Europe tell the same story. Violence surges, victims suffer, and criminals act with confidence because they face no immediate resistance. Law-abiding citizens are turned into bystanders, expected to endure the inhumanity and utter madness. This is the predictable outcome of disarming the populace. Predators exploit defenselessness, and the innocent are left as prey. By contrast, in America, the right and responsibility of self-defense creates deterrence and ensures that, when evil strikes, it can be met with force equal to the threat. Armed populations also serve as practical deterrents against government overreach. The Second Amendment functions as both constitutional protection and philosophical declaration about citizen-government relationships. History shows what common sense confirms. Tyrants face greater obstacles from armed populations than from defenseless subjects. Responsible Catholic gun ownership requires serious commitment to training, safety, and moral preparation. This process actually deepens faith formation rather than compromising it. Gun owners must examine their consciences about using lethal force only as a final resort, an examination that strengthens rather than weakens Catholic moral reasoning. The discipline required for safe handling of a weapon mirrors the self-control demanded in every part of Christian life. The Catechism reminds us that anger itself is not a sin. Instead, it must be directed toward justice rather than vengeance. In this light, the Catholic who defends his family acts not from hatred but from love. His defense flows from the duty to protect, not the desire to destroy. The foregoing moral framework lifts Catholic teaching above secular ideas of self-defense that focus only on individual survival. In the Christian vision, preparation and prayer aren't mutually exclusive, they are mutually implicated. St. Joan of Arc prayed passionately even as she led armies to defend France. St. Michael the Archangel, patron of soldiers and police, embodies the union of spiritual and physical defense, both aimed at shielding God's people from evil. The deaths of the innocent children slain last Wednesday call for mourning, but mourning alone is not enough. Their loss also calls for resolve, a determination to ensure that such atrocities become far more difficult to carry out. That resolve requires trained, armed, faithful men and women prepared to act when mere seconds mean the difference between survival and slaughter. In an age when wolves stalk churches and children alike, shepherds must be ready to defend their flock. This is not a rejection of Christian values, but their most urgent and practical expression. To shield the innocent from deliberate violence is to embody the gospel's call to love in its most daring and decisive form. I should note that John McGlenn has provided many hyperlinks throughout his article to news items and sources that back up his claims. So if you would like to find those hyperlinks, simply go to the Substack Tradition and Sanity and have a look at the article there. Thank you for listening, and may God bless you.